signed the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC. That treaty was signed in 1994. So we want to just lay perspective on this. We want to dive deep into the conversation. My colleague Peter Theuri joins us. Peter, what stood out for you in the whole conference?
Thank you, Brian. I must say that the clip that just played before we came to this reminded me of Sir David Attenborough, who is a filmmaker and a natural historian, who was there and was one of the faces of the COP26. And if you think about his dedication to life on Earth, plants, animals, and where we are right now, and he's 95 and he has seen the world change from a point where we looked like we were doing very well on climate to this point where we are almost at a crisis. What stood out for me in this is that what is being talked about is basically what was discussed in the Paris Agreement of 2015 and questions on whether what was discussed back then was tenable and whether it will be tenable this time around. Remember, there were debates around where we are headed in terms of climate, with it being said that the last 6 years have been the warmest years in the known history of humankind, and the last 4 decades have been terrible. Okay. So we had around we have around 25,000 delegates from, I think, over 200 countries and over 120 heads of state making addresses and trying to see exactly how climate change crisis can be mitigated. And Brian, according to, if you listened to those speeches, it doesn't look like there is, I wouldn't want to say there is, it doesn't look like there is a lot of hope, but it looks like we are racing against time and it doesn't look like we are winning.
Theory, you're throwing caution in the wind with that statement right there. So you are skeptical about the achievements that we want to achieve in terms of containing climate change, and part of the resolutions was to have the mean increase in temperature to about 2 degrees Celsius, I beg your pardon. So right now they're lowering the target to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Is it tenable or it is a pipe dream?
Yes, 1.5 degrees is the number that has dominated, right? You talked about 2, and 2 years was mentioned as being, you're setting a target, but then you want to make a realistic target. So you have your 1.5, but you're taking it up to 2 because you think 1.5 is a little too much of an expectation. But still that 1.5 is looking difficult to hit. This is why. Now, if you talk about pre-industrial temperature levels, it's what we are talking about, an increase by what? An increase by 1.5. And we've already seen that increase by 1.1. So we're looking at mitigating an increase of an extra 0.4 percentage points. And it doesn't look possible. Remember, even as our leaders come and commit to not, funding fossil fuel projects or about greening their energy sources or, using clean energy, there is also one problem. There has been skeptics. There have been skeptical leaders from developing countries who are saying these same world leaders or leaders of the big, very developed countries who are telling us cut down on use of fossil fuels, long use them. It's our time to industrialize. Are they trying to do this so that they can halt us? There are a lot of issues if you think about trying to cut down that increase in temperature to 1.5 degrees that don't seem like they could support, like it could happen in the next 10 years. And there are some experts who are saying, well, probably we can talk about 2.5, we can talk about 2.7, but 1.5 looks like being quite over-ambitious. But with, of course, the discussions and the commitments they are making, we can just wait and see if that's going to happen, but it will need very, very radical decisions to be taken.
Well, while in the spirit of looking at the climate action, and the leaders, as you have rightly put it, they, put their commitment out there to champion the cause of climate change. But as you say, there could be a bit of, brushing of shoulders here and there. So what would be at stake even as they commit? Because, hey, look here, the fossil fuel market is still huge, and we're looking at so many more years, perhaps, so that countries adopt e-mobility, the facilities, the infrastructure that needs to fund the e-mobility systems, particularly even in Kenya, is a big thing. So talk to us about what would be at stake if leaders fully committed to actually work on the climate change agenda.
Let's start here, Brian. If you look at, there's a report that came out, I think, in October that was backed by the United Nations saying that Mount Kenya, Mount Kilimanjaro, and I think Ruwenzori are losing, they will not be snow-capped in the next 10, 20 years. And this means a lot, seeing as to they are the only, I think, 3 mountains in Africa that are snow-capped. That's a very big disaster for tourism, for you know, it tells us that we are heading into disastrous times where the climate is changing so much that some of the things that we have never really thought could come to happen will actually happen. Looking at Mount Kenya and not seeing it snow-capped, it's not something. I come from a place where at home I can see it. It's not something we expected. And there's been debates like Bezos, who was there. There's this whole, and somebody like Elon Musk who are competing to make a human species interplanetary and stuff like that. They have been asked, all these resources you're committing to traveling to Mars or wherever, can't you use that to make Earth a better place? There's a whole push and pull, tug of war between people with different interests, between countries with different abilities. Okay. There's been a problem and a complaint from countries that are not doing very well economically that we are underfunded, and we are the people who are actually facing the brunt of the damage in the world. So there'll always be a tussle, and we don't know if they can reach an agreement.
As we bring this conversation to a close, Theuri, you have rightly mentioned about countries having different abilities. We want to just take stock. Part of the resolution of the first days of the conference was that richer countries, or countries that are able or well off, or should support in terms of budgetary, in terms of policy support, to countries that are considered poorer. How tenable do you think this is, considering even the issue of vaccines alone is still contentious?
Well, you mentioned vaccines, and definitely, yes, I think it's also going to be contentious. It said that there is 130 trillion that has already been kind of set aside by banks, by investors, to try and support the countries that are trying to you know, that are really not doing very well economically, fight this kind of pandemic. I don't know, you saw the Minister of Tuvalu making his speech inside water to show how much the water levels have risen in the seas around their country. And I think this tug of war is not easy to win for the smaller countries, but these debates are very crucial. I think putting aside a chest to help such a war chest to help these countries that are not doing very well is a good start. How this can be sustained for the long term, I do not know, but we'll just wait and see. But I can say that to have the discussion in the first place is a good thing. To have the discussion, that the discussion is there, that the world is aware of what's happening, that the countries from the leaders from poor countries can express themselves and say what the problem is, and be listened to by those from other bigger countries and come to a consensus. I think that's a good start.
Amazing. My colleague Peter Theuri right there, just dotting the I's and crossing the T's on the resolutions of COP26 happening in Glasgow, United Kingdom. What would be the other recommendations coming from that? We'll be keeping an eye and an ear on that to bring every bit of detail and perspective to you, because here is where you get the whole story. Talking of the whole story, more comes up after the break. BBC Money Daily. Don't go too far.